Good morning, everyone. My name is Zahid Torres-Rahman. I'm the founder and CEO of business Fights Poverty. We're a business-led collaboration network focused on social impact. And really what's inspired me throughout my career, and certainly the 10 years that we've been running the organization, is this. It's the idea of bringing people together, collaborating, connecting, finding new ways to harness the collective intelligence that's represented in this room. So I'm really excited to welcome you all here, and thank you so much for making the time to be here. One of the things I should mention as context for the conversation we're about to have, the way we do things, the way we drive collaboration is to be very specific, identify a challenge, bring the best people together to look at that challenge, work in an intentional way to help solve that challenge to some extent, but more importantly, build relationships in the process of that journey. So this is part of a much bigger journey that we're on around this question of corporate social innovation and entrepreneurship. We've just coming towards the end of a journey that's been with Barclays, CEMEX and Pearson, looking at how do we build the know-how to help people create these commercial innovations with social impact. And the next phase, which is very exciting, is looking at how do we take that to the system level? How do we create systems in corporates that enable these ideas to spur and sustain over long term? And to help us talk about this, we've got a great initial panel to kick things off. Props here. So the session will be moderated by a long-term friend, Maggie de Pree, who, by coincidence, exactly 10 years ago, published this seminal piece of work called The Social Intrapreneur, which really introduced the idea onto the stage, this idea of individuals within these big corporates being the change makers, the people who make these things happen. And since then, Maggie has created an organization called the League of Intrapreneurs, which essentially is a learning tribe, and you'll be able to describe it better. But it's a really important space for people to, I guess, in a way, stand on the shoulders of others, cry on the shoulders of others, and really was an important community to bring people together. Maggie is joined by Gib Bulloch, who many of you will know, a tour de force in the intrapreneur space. And Gib, on the one hand, has been an intrapreneur in extension. I'll let him tell his story in a minute. But also today, he's publishing a book called The Intrapreneur, which is right here, available at all good bookshops and on Amazon. But it really will be, I think, a game changer for our subject. It's a deep dive into the personal experience of an intrapreneur, and I think it's quite a remarkable book. And then we're also joined by Andrew Kassoy, who founded a thing called B Lab and the whole idea of B corporations. And in fact, I was saying to Andrew, 3 years ago, I saw him on stage being awarded the Skoll Award for his work. And when I saw him on stage, I thought, I want to be a B Corp as well. And by coincidence, I was sitting next to someone in his team, which is a complete coincidence, in the new theatre. And they said, well, actually, B Corp is launching in the UK. And because of that, we actually then applied, and we became one of the first B Corps in the UK. So that was a really important moment for me personally. So thank you for that. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Maggie, who will lead us through our first conversation. Thank you.
Wonderful. Good morning, everybody. As Zahid said, my name is Maggie de Pree, one of the actually many co-founders of the League of Intrapreneurs. It truly is a global tribe and movement now of people driving transformative innovation from within business, but actually increasingly NGOs and governments. We're seeing that same need for those capabilities of influence and persuasion and innovation taking place across different aspects of the system. I was sat here a couple of years ago at the Skoll World Forum in an auditorium much like this when Muhammad Yunus, the Nobel Prize-winning economist and social entrepreneur who many of you will know or be familiar with, came on the stage and he started talking about science fiction. I'm not sure if any of you were there for this talk, but he talked about the role of science fiction in helping to pull technological development along. So driverless cars, which maybe was just written about in the 60s, now a thing that's actually happening today. Going to Mars, once only a dream, and some science fiction book is now actually people are planning to make these excursions and to make the impossible possible. And he said what we need now is social fiction. we need the stories to propel the invention and the innovation around social and environmental impact. And he implored us at the end, he kind of put down a challenge, and he said, what if all businesses were social businesses? And that really struck me because it seems maybe impossible, but actually is becoming possible. And the guests I have here today, the two gentlemen to my right, and the three other guests who will join me in a minute, are all pioneering this social fiction. And without further ado, I'd like to turn first to Gib, and really to ask you, this question around the intrapreneur. I think for many, this language of entrepreneurship may be new. So maybe you could just share a bit about what actually is an intrapreneur, and particularly why should we care? Why are they important to this impact ecosystem of which we're all a part?
Hi, good morning, everyone. It's great to be in this room with so many supporters and like-minded people and things like that. And in this very polarized world that we talk about, the left and the right and the different kind of factions, I think there is one exception, which is this innovation space that brings together the entrepreneurs and the intrapreneurs and the supporters and all around purpose. When I came out of university, there was a very binary choice. You join the corporate world and make money, or you go and do some good. And that probably meant joining a charity or something. Or you join a big business, or you're an entrepreneur. And for me, I think the intrapreneur thing, and I didn't know what the word was until Maggie came along about 10 years ago, around the time of that book, and said, we think you're one of these people. I said, social what? No, you are one of these people. You're working at Accenture to try and change the system from within. You're a social intrapreneur. And the label, I'm not hung up on at all. The theory of change, I do buy into. This notion that even in that last 10 years, certainly if you look 20 years out, the size and scale of multinational corporations has just grown phenomenally, such that we now have, some people I've heard quoted saying 70% of the largest economies in the world are global businesses. Doing some great things, but, in terms of governance, in terms of democracy or lack of democracy in these institutions, the power still sits there somewhat at the top. And for me, intrapreneurship shifts that. That empowers people within the business. It's gender neutral. You can be a man or a woman. It's everything neutral. You can be in any function in the business. You don't have to be in the CSR department or the sustainability department. And it's all about driving change and shifting these enormous super tankers in a slightly different direction. And I am biased from my own experience of being in one of these large 400,000 person, 80 billion market cap super tankers. But give me 1 degree change towards a more sustainable, more socially responsible organization, such as one of these multinationals. And I think it could be worth, 1,000 small startup businesses. The temptation is to go out there. I had the temptation 15 years ago to go out and start up on my own. I don't know whether it would have been easier or harder, but I made the choice to stay inside and not change companies, but try and change the company that I worked in. And I think that, as we're seeing, has the potential to have more and more impact as more people join that journey.
I'd love to hear more about the journey of the entrepreneur and maybe sharing your own experience at Accenture Development Partnerships. When was it easy, but also when did you bump up against you talk about the corporate immune system, right? Almost like these entrepreneurs are this positive virus or something that bump up against that.
I think that the easiest answer to your leading question would be, it's super hard or whatever. Let me say up front, it's the best thing I have ever done. It's the most enjoyable, inspiring journey. I had the best job in the world. There was no other job I wanted inside the firm or outside the firm. No, it wasn't easy though. And that's what made it interesting, because you are continually finding yourself pushing up against such established, the corporate immune system is this kind of invisible inertia that exists within large organizations. The processes, the policies, the attitudes, the culture, the risk management, a whole number of things that conspire against any sort of initiative or individual or group of individuals who are trying to deviate from this OCD focus that corporations have on short-term profit maximization. And the antibodies sort of invisibly come out and make life quite hard for yourselves, as I talk about a bit in the book. I've had it well plugged. Thank you very much, Zahid. But if you want to know more, there's lots in there about, the successes, the progress we made, the ups, the downs, the elations, the frustrations. It's kind of all in there with a bit of a sort of sting in the tail around the idea of finding yourself, asking, am I the crazy one in the room? It's difficult to deviate from the herd. It's uncomfortable to feel that you're the odd one out. And if we can somehow create an environment where people don't have to feel the odd one out, you feel more the norm by saying, guess what? I think businesses should be maybe innovating to solve big social problems profitably at scale. Isn't that so crazy to suggest that? I personally don't think so. So how do we make that the norm rather than the exception?
It's a great place, Andrew, to bring you in, because one of the things we've heard over and over again from entrepreneurs is that they do bump up against this immune system, and often it is that short-term shareholder return. So if you're asking a company to sacrifice, that short-term return at the, for the impact, it's very difficult. I'd love you to share your perspectives on, how you see that kind of macro picture changing, and really interested that B Corp is now kind of bleeding into the corporate world.
So I don't know, how many people know what a B Corp is? Wow.
Great job.
All right, so I'm going to drop the mic. So when we started 10 years ago creating this certification for companies, it was really focused on mostly small, not publicly held, so mostly private companies, often family-owned, sometimes venture or private equity-backed, but always focused on companies that had probably a lot more leeway to change rapidly, generally like an entrepreneur or a founder of a company who wanted to see their business as a force for good and had the capability of just deciding to do that. It might still be hard work, and it might be a long journey, but they had the leeway. They didn't have the shareholders and the short-term profit pressures that a lot of big corporates have. And even then, getting companies to say, to move from simply saying, I would like our business to be a force for good, or we think it is, to actually meeting a set of very high social and environmental performance standards and actually changing their legal structure so that they were legally accountable to create value for all of their stakeholders, turned out to be really hard even for those businesses. And so as we've gone from a few companies that were certified as B Corps, who basically were like, I'm in, without having any idea what they were in for, to now a community of about 2,500 certified B Corps that are in, I think, 67 countries around the world. There's been a transition in what kinds of businesses are getting certified. Like, it started out as companies who were doing it because it was a sole entrepreneur saying, I want to lead. And I don't really care whether there's value to it or not. I want to lead. To now needing a more like a better business case for it. It doesn't necessarily mean like a more profitable case, but there needs to be a case for like why it's good business or why it's good for the business. And as that has started to prove out, and we could tell some stories about it if we have time, we've seen more and more large companies engage. Sometimes it's because they actually want to be certified B Corps. They're all in and they want to get all the way there. And sometimes because they want to use some of the tools that we've created in order to address some of the big like structural problems that exist that make it really hard particularly for big corporates to change. And so to be certified as a B Corp, companies do two things. They meet a set of social and environmental performance standards that are in an impact assessment that we created. It's called the B Impact Assessment. The second thing they do is they change their legal form to make themselves legally accountable to their stakeholders. Each of those two things a company can do on its own without needing to get certified by us. We just happen to provide this thing, and it's got a B, and then a company can market themselves as a B Corp. But while there are 2,500 certified B Corps, there are now 70,000 companies that are using the B Impact Assessment as a tool. Often it's an intrapreneur. It's somebody inside of a company, usually not the CEO or somebody in the C-suite, who says, wow, I heard about this tool. This could be a great concrete way to engage inside of our company and think about like how we're doing, benchmark ourselves, and start to identify some best practices, things that we could do to improve. And in some cases, that's led to companies getting certified as B Corps, but in most cases, it's been generally somebody young inside the company, like goes through this impact assessment, and it's got lots of holes in it because they don't have the answers to all the questions that might come from different departments around the company. But as they start to socialize that, they start to get people excited. And so in some cases, that's led all the way up to the C-suite. Like Danone is an interesting example where actually through a couple of acquisitions of B corporations, like this idea of like a B Corp way of running a company started to sort of like make its way up until eventually Emmanuel Faber at their investor meeting last spring said, we would like Danone to be a certified B Corp. It's going to take us years. And so he actually said, we'd like to do it by 2030. But we're going to start along a journey that's going to be every year. A bunch of our subsidiaries are going to get certified. A bunch of our divisions are going to start using this impact assessment tool as a way of identifying best practices. Or like Bank Colombia, which is one of the largest banks in Latin America, decided to start using that tool with their suppliers first. They wanted to see if they could drive their supply chain. They have 6,000 suppliers around Latin America. And vendors, and they wanted to figure out ways of starting to drive their suppliers to be more environmentally, socially responsible, and so they're using that as a tool again. So I think, and then the last thing I guess I would say is, from a governance perspective, we have a huge governance problem with large corporations. Like they are under ever more pressure to produce short-term results. And it's very hard to ward that off. And the people see the purpose of business as being to maximize value for shareholders in the short term, like the famous Milton Friedman phrase. And it's very hard, even when people have good intentions, to fight against that. And this idea of changing the legal accountability of the corporation is a pretty powerful one for changing the conversation in the boardroom. And so increasingly, we also see a lot of companies starting to adopt this benefit corporation legal structure as a way of ensuring that there's a different kind of accountability that can sort of ward off some of that short-term pressure.
Fantastic. So I'll just ask a final kind of context-setting question, then we're going to invite our three entrepreneurs up on stage. But I guess thinking about the social fiction, maybe you could share your vision for what is that future, and then what's required to get there.
I love this social fiction thing. I hadn't heard that before, but I think it's a really powerful metaphor. I think storytelling, whether that's in a book, as I've tried to do there, this is not your average business book with, if you're wanting charts and graphs and what am I meant to think, forget it, think whatever you want from this story. I hope it may well inspire you in some ways. It is asking, this question: who's crazy? Is the status quo that we are operating within in the corporate ecosystem the norm that is deemed to be the orthodoxy from business schools around maximizing shareholder value and focusing on this one single dimension? Forget people, forget planet, forget all these other things. We focus on that one thing. For me, that is nuts. And I'm able to I try in this book to sort of imagine or reimagine what a different business, private sector could be. I'm very pro-business. I would have loved Accenture. I would have loved Accenture Development Partnerships to become a B Corp. It was on the cards, maybe before 2030. But it's seeing this kind of convergence that takes place between not just a blurring of the boundaries that people talk about between the for-profit and non-profit sectors and the public-private, but a fundamental redefinition of where these boundaries actually lie, or indeed, are there boundaries at all? I'm imagining a fourth sector emerging as opposed to the private sector, the public sector, the third sector. What about a new business ecosystem that has profit at its heart, that is the North Star goal over short-term profit, that has more democratic decision-making, bringing in other stakeholders, not just employees, not just customers, but in fact, wider society, to give them a stake in what these super tankers actually do and for whom they are benefiting. And that's what I'd like to see is a purpose-driven business ecosystem enabled by technology. Technology is enabling things to be done in incredibly amazing different ways by different actors. So hybrid organizations that might bring together different businesses from different sectors. It might bring together erstwhile NGOs. It might bring together some funders to create new business models that will start to solve some of these social problems. And I think the entrepreneurs, the change that's needed for that vision, I'm sorry, but I don't see, with a few exceptions, I don't see that vision coming top down by the incumbents who, thank you very much, have done extremely well by the status quo. I see the 20-somethings and the 30-somethings. You've got some oldish, crusty people here. I'm a millennial, by the way. I don't see millennial as an age. I see it more as a mindset thing. So I'm a millennial trapped in this kind of Gen X body. But we can all be millennials now, right? We're all in the sustainability department now. It's people, you can do it from your day job and have that bottom-up change individually and collectively. It's just about, again, tell your story, tell the different story. It doesn't have to be true. It just has to be inspiring, and then maybe people will follow suit.
I mean, I think what we're seeing happening, and like I think the vision, it's only a question of how long it gets there, is about culture shift, and it's about seeing business, which dominates much of what happens in society and all the things we do as consumer, as worker, as investor. It's about changing the purpose of business so that business is playing a leadership role instead of a following role in creating a more inclusive economy and creating a shared and durable prosperity for all. And I think it has the capacity to do that, but there are some big structural things that have to change. And I think the idea of social fiction is a powerful one. Stories inspire us. At the same time, big corporates in particular are pretty good at appropriating great stories and turning them into marketing, and so I think one of the most powerful things that people who are inside of corporates can do is play the role of ensuring that corporations are actually authentic, that there's something concrete there. And so, like when I think about like what our particular role with B Corp is in working with larger corporates, it's to help provide some of those tools to try to help them maintain that authenticity or to keep it real instead of just marketing. And the last thing I would say is, your question made me think of there was a great speech that Bobby Kennedy gave in South Africa during the days of apartheid, like the Ripples speech. And I'll butcher the quote, so I won't try to do it. But basically, the idea was like most of us are not going to be a famous leader who changes the world all by ourselves. Most of us are not Nelson Mandela or Muhammad Yunus or Martin Luther King, but most change happens by the ripples of the little things that each one of us chooses to do, and it's as those ripples cross each other, they create this massive current that can change the world that we live in. And so when I think about like the role that most of us end up playing, particularly inside of businesses, it's that. And it's constantly trying to create those ripples, and we can do it if we have concrete tools to use instead of just stories. I think we actually can use business to create that more inclusive economy that we hope for.